The cool, salt-laced air of Coronado, California was a tangible thing. At 05:30, it settled over the quiet streets of the neighborhood, a crisp gray blanket silencing the world before the Pacific sun burned it away. In this pre-dawn quiet, two figures moved as one. Chief Petty Officer Jack Corrigan, known only as Stone to the men he served with, ran with a steady, grounding rhythm. He was a man in his mid-30s, built of the dense, functional muscle and quiet intensity that came from a life of pushing limits. His face, set in the neutral stillness of a man who had seen too much to be easily surprised, was beaded with sweat. Beside him, moving with a silent, fluid grace that was almost unnerving, was Kilo, a 5-year-old German shepherd. His black and tan coat seemed to absorb what little light the street lamps offered. Kilo was not a pet, not in the traditional sense. He was a responsibility Jack had taken on, a failed K-9 candidate Jack had rescued and retrained himself. In doing so, he had forged a bond stronger than steel. They passed a jogger, a woman who smiled and waved. Jack nodded in return, a clipped, polite movement. Kilo's ears twitched, acknowledging the woman, but his pace never faltered. His eyes never left the path ahead, always returning to Jack. This was their ritual. 3 miles down the coast, 3 miles back. It was meditation. It was work. A squirrel, suicidal with morning confidence, darted onto the pavement 20 feet ahead. Kilo's entire body tensed, a coiled spring of predatory instinct, but that was all. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He did not even break rhythm. His dark eyes locked onto the small mammal, catalogued it as a non-threat, and dismissed it, his gaze shifting back to the front. Jack reached down, his hand brushing the dog's head for a single second. "Good boy," he murmured. It was all the praise Kilo needed. They were a closed circuit, a system of two. Jack was the mind, Kilo was the blade, and in this quiet suburban world, they were both trying to pretend they were something else. They finished the run as the sky began to bruise with purple and orange. They returned to their modest single-story home, a house that betrayed nothing of its owner's profession. It was clean, orderly, and anonymous. Jack went through his post-run cooldown, Kilo mirroring him, stretching on the back deck as Jack worked his muscles. An hour later, showered and dressed in civilian clothes, Jack stood in his kitchen. The smell of dark roast coffee filled the air. He was pouring a cup when the sound of the coffee maker's final gurgle and click caught him wrong. It was a sharp mechanical noise, too similar to the sound of a gear mechanism locking. In a fraction of a second, he was not in his kitchen. He was in Kandahar province, the air thick with dust and the metallic smell of cordite and blood. It was dark, the only light coming from the green glow of his night vision. He heard the scrape of a boot on gravel. He heard his own voice, low and urgent. "Manny, right side. Watch that alley." A muffled reply, a joke from a man Jack loved like a brother. Then chaos. Not a firefight, not an explosion, but a sudden, horrific silence where there should have been a report. The scraping sound again, closer. The sickening realization of a trap sprung. He remembered the feeling of helplessness, the icy dread that flooded his veins, a feeling so foreign and so absolute that it haunted him more than the violence. He had frozen. For 1/10 of a second, Stone, the man who never wavered, had frozen. Jack. The voice was not a voice. It was a sensation, a heavy weight pressed against his thigh, a cold, wet nose pushing insistently into his clenched fist. Jack opened his eyes. He was clutching the kitchen counter so hard his knuckles were white. The coffee cup sat empty beside his hand. He was breathing in short, sharp gasps. Kilo was there. The great dog had risen from his mat and was pressed hard against Jack's legs, a solid, living anchor. Seeing that Jack was still lost, Kilo moved. He put his 2 front paws up on Jack's chest, a behavior Jack had never trained, and pushed. It was just enough to break Jack's rigid posture. Jack looked down into those intelligent, worried brown eyes. Kilo whined, a low, questioning sound, and then licked Jack's face once on the chin. The simple, domestic act shattered the memory. The dust of Afghanistan receded, replaced by the smell of coffee. Jack's breathing slowed. He dropped his hand from the counter and buried it in the thick fur of the dog's neck. "Hey, boy," Jack whispered, his voice rough. "Hey, I'm here. I'm okay." Kilo leaned his entire weight against him, a furry guardian who protected his master not from bullets, but from himself. Jack took a few deep breaths, steadying himself. He was grateful for the dog's intuition. Kilo was his early warning system, his tether to the real world. He gave the dog a final, firm rub and straightened up, grabbing his coffee. "Come on, let's check the perimeter." He walked into the backyard, a cup of coffee in one hand, forcing normality back into the morning. The yard was fenced, secure. Kilo trotted ahead, sniffing the fence line, a casual patrol that was anything but. "Good morning, Jack." Jack turned. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, was in her garden, separated from his by a chain-link fence. Mrs. Peterson was a woman in her late 60s with kind, discerning eyes and hands perpetually dusted with soil from her zinnias. A widow, her late husband had been a Marine, and she possessed the quiet, unbreakable resilience of a longtime military spouse. "Morning, Mrs. Peterson," Jack said, walking over. "Your roses are looking good." "They're a battle, but we're winning," she smiled. "I wanted to thank you again for fixing that gate hinge. It's as sturdy as a bank vault now." "Happy to help," Jack said. "It's good to keep things secure." Mrs. Peterson's gaze softened as she looked past him. "Well, I know you're secure." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small homemade biscuit. Kilo, who had been sitting patiently at Jack's side, perked up, but he did not move toward her. He looked up at Jack. Jack gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Only then did Kilo walk to the fence, sit, and gently take the treat from Mrs. Peterson's hand. Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "He's just incredible. I brought that for my hero dog." She watched as Kilo returned to Jack's side, chewing the treat with dignity. "He watches you, you know," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice thoughtful. "Not like a pet, not like my old Golden, bless his heart. Kilo watches you like he's your partner." She looked at Jack. "It's a comfort knowing you two are looking out for each other. My David always said you could tell a man by the loyalty he inspires." Jack was quiet for a moment. "He's a good boy. We look out for each other." "That you do," she nodded, satisfied. "Have a blessed day, Jack." "You, too." Jack finished his coffee. The interaction with Mrs. Peterson settling the last of his unease. He was safe. This was his home. He had a good neighbor. He had a loyal partner. He went back inside, Kilo trailing him. He placed his empty mug in the sink and glanced at his phone, which he had left on the charging stand. It was a military-grade secure device, but it sat on his kitchen counter just like any other phone. A small red light was blinking. Not a text, not a normal email. A notification from a secure, encrypted app. The neighbor Jack vanished. The man Mrs. Peterson saw, the man who fixed fences, evaporated. In his place stood Stone. He picked up the phone, his movements precise, economical. He entered his passcode. The app opened to a single message. It was short. Intel confirmed. U.S. soil. Asset active. Below the text was a grainy, long-lens photograph taken from a street camera. It showed a man getting out of a black sedan, his face partially obscured by shadow, but it was enough. Jack's blood ran cold. He zoomed in, his thumb steady. The face was older, scarred, but the eyes were the same, cold, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. Ivan Volkov, the architect of the failed mission, the man responsible for Manny's death. The man Jack had been hunting for 2 years. And he was here, in the United States. Jack locked the phone. The fragile peace of the morning, the cool air, the smell of coffee, the quiet rhythm of his life, it all shattered into a million pieces. He stood perfectly still, his eyes sweeping his safe, suburban kitchen. He was no longer home. He was in a forward operating base, and the enemy was inside the wire. Beside his leg, Kilo, sensing the sudden, absolute shift in his master, rose from his mat. He did not go to Jack for comfort. He stood rigid, facing the front door, a low, barely audible rumble starting deep in his chest. He was on watch. The image on the phone screen burned itself into Jack's mind. Ivan Volkov. Here. Active. The world tilted. The quiet morning sounds of his neighborhood, a distant lawn mower, a pair of birds arguing in the oak tree, faded into a high-pitched internal whine. Kilo's low, constant growl was the only thing that felt real. The dog had not moved. He was a statue of black and tan muscle, his gaze locked on the front door, a silent guardian sensing the seismic shift in his master. Jack's training slammed into place, an iron shutter dropping over the spike of adrenaline. He did not panic. He moved. His first motion was to the kitchen keypad, his fingers rapidly disabling the home setting and activating the away perimeter sensors. It was a flimsy civilian system, but it was something. "Kilo, heel," he commanded. His voice was low, flat. The dog immediately fell silent and moved to his left side, their shoulders almost touching, a living weapon tethered to his side. He moved through the house, checking the lock on every window, every door. He grabbed his Secure-Go bag from the hall closet, not his deployment kit, but the one he kept for domestic emergencies. It contained encrypted comms, a medical kit, and a compact firearm, which he now checked and holstered at the small of his back, hidden by his shirt. He was out the door in less than 2 minutes. As he locked the deadbolt behind him, he gave Kilo one final command: watch. Kilo sat in the center of the living room, facing the door, perfectly still. He would remain there, alert and waiting, until Jack returned. The drive to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was a study in contrasts. The morning had blossomed into a postcard-perfect day. Sunlight glittered on the Pacific, and tourists in colorful shirts were already heading to the beach. Jack drove his unassuming truck, a dark gray vehicle that blended into the suburban landscape. He kept his speed at the exact limit. He signaled every turn. But inside, he was 1,000 miles away, his mind a cold engine of analysis, processing the implications of Volkov's presence. This wasn't a mission. This was an infestation. He bypassed the main gate, heading for a secure entrance he hadn't used in months. The guards, recognizing his credentials and the look in his eyes, waved him through with crisp efficiency. He parked in a sterile concrete garage and entered a building that had no name, only a number. The briefing room was 5 levels underground, a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SIF. It was a windowless, soundproof box that smelled faintly of stale coffee and ozone from the air scrubbers. Seated at the head of the polished table was Captain Wallace. Wallace was a man in his late 50s with a face that looked carved from old hickory and pale, piercing blue eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. He was Jack's commanding officer, a man who spoke little and missed nothing. "Stone," Wallace said, his voice a low gravel. It wasn't a greeting, it was an acknowledgement. "Sit." Jack took a seat. The room was empty, save for the two of them. "You saw the dispatch," Wallace stated. "Volkov confirmed," Jack replied. Wallace leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "He slipped the net in Hamburg 2 months ago. Went dark. We assumed he was deep in Eastern Europe. We were wrong." He pointed to the large screen at the end of the room. It flickered to life, showing the same photo from Jack's phone, now enhanced. "Came in through Canada. Used a fake passport, a deep cover identity. He's been on US soil for at least 3 weeks. And he is here, in California." Jack's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Revenge," Wallace said simply. "He's not operational. He's not here for arms or intel. He's here for us. He's hunting." Wallace's eyes locked onto Jack's. "He's hunting the members of Operation Nightfall. And you, son, are at the top of his list." The air in the room felt colder. Operation Nightfall, the mission that had cost Manny his life. The mission to intercept a shipment of chemical weapons precursors. "I was ground intel lead," Jack said. "You were," Wallace confirmed. "You were the one who ID'd the location. You were the one who called the shot on the secondary target, the vehicle we believed was carrying Volkov's primary partner." "It was a good call," Jack said, his voice hard. "It was," Wallace agreed. "We got the weapons. But the intel was flawed. The partner wasn't in the car. Volkov's son was. 19 years old, unaffiliated. Just a kid driving his father's car." Jack felt a familiar cold stone drop in his stomach, the collateral damage that the after-action report had sanitized. "So this is personal." "There is nothing more personal," Wallace said. "He's not a terrorist, Jack. He's a grieving father. A grieving father who happens to have the training and resources of a Spetsnaz colonel. He will be methodical. He will be patient. And he will be ruthless. He wants to dismantle your life before he ends it." Miles away, in a sterile short-term rental overlooking the placid waters of a marina, Ivan Volkov was doing just that. The apartment was immaculate, devoid of any personal touches. Ivan himself was a tall man, lean and disciplined, with short iron gray hair and a face that was a road map of hard living. He was not a monster. He was a professional, and he was in mourning. He sat at a clean desk, a worn photograph in his left hand. It showed a smiling teenage boy in a football uniform, holding a small local trophy. The boy had Ivan's eyes. With his right hand, Ivan used a mouse to navigate files on a laptop. He was reviewing a surveillance report on Jack Corrigan. He saw photos of Jack's truck. He had diagrams of Jack's house, likely pulled from county records. He had Jack's routine mapped out. He clicked on a video file. It was grainy, taken from a distance, showing Jack on his morning run. Ivan watched, his face impassive. Then he zoomed in. He saw the dog. He watched the animal's fluid, disciplined movement, the way it mirrored its master. He accessed another file, a report on Jack's purchase of the dog, his training. Ivan let out a short, quiet huff of air. Contempt. A beast, he whispered in his native Russian. He tethers his life to a beast. He looked at the picture of his son, then back at the screen. In his world, emotion was weakness. Attachments were liabilities. A family, a home, a pet, they were not sources of strength. They were levers. A dog, he mused, a cold spark lighting in his eyes. A point of leverage. A tool to be broken. He saw Kilo not as a guardian, but as a weakness, Jack's first, most obvious, most personal vulnerability. Jack drove home 2 hours later. The sun was high, beating down on the pavement. The world felt too bright, too loud. Wallace had ordered him to a safe house, but Jack had refused. If he's hunting me, let him hunt me. I won't run. I'll make my own ground. Wallace, understanding the mind of his warrior, had relented but had placed a quiet 2-man Overwatch team in the neighborhood. Jack knew they were out there, invisible, but it felt insufficient. He pulled into his driveway. The house looked exactly as he had left it, safe, quiet, but he knew it was a lie. He got out of the truck. This time, he didn't call for Kilo. He gave a soft 2-whistle signal. A moment later, Kilo's head appeared in the window, and then he was gone. Jack heard the click of the dog door in the back, and Kilo appeared from around the side of the house, his ears up, his tail low and alert. Jack gave the dog a silent hand signal. Perimeter. He moved right. Kilo moved left. They swept the perimeter of the house just as they had trained, just as they had done in the quiet of the morning. But this was not the morning. This was war. Jack checked the seals on the windows. He checked the back door. Everything was locked, secure. He was about to dismiss the tension as paranoia when Kilo stopped. He was near the back corner of the house, by the dense hydrangea bushes Mrs. Peterson was so proud of. The dog didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stood, his head lowered, a growl building in his chest so low it was more of a vibration than a sound. What is it, boy? Jack moved to his side, his hand automatically going to the weapon at his back. He followed Kilo's gaze. At first, he saw nothing, just the mulch, the thick green leaves, and the damp, dark soil underneath. Then he saw it. The morning coastal air had kept the ground soft, and there, pressed deep into the earth, partially obscured by a leaf, was an impression. It was not his boot. It was not Mrs. Peterson's gardening clog. It was a deep, sharp-edged military-style boot print. Ice flooded Jack's veins. He knelt, his fingers hovering over the print. It was fresh. Within the last few hours, while he was at the base, Ivan had been here. He had stood right here, yards from his window. He had watched. He had listened. And then he had left. He had left this single, damning sign, a calling card of contempt. Jack stood up slowly. He looked at his house, his sanctuary. It was compromised. Ivan hadn't just been scouting. He had been sending a message, I can get to you anytime, anyplace. Kilo was rigid at his side, staring not at the footprint but at the dark line of trees that bordered the backyard, as if he could still smell the enemy in the air. The boot print was a declaration of war. It was a violation far more profound than a broken lock or a shattered window. It was Ivan Volkov, a ghost of a man standing in the soft earth of Jack's backyard, proving that the walls Jack had built were meaningless. Jack stared at the impression, the world narrowing to that single, sharp-edged shape. He saw the contempt in it, the patience. Kilo's growl remained a low, subsonic vibration, a warning that was felt more than heard. I know, Jack said, his voice a flat, cold whisper. Stand down. The growl cut off instantly. Jack rose, his movements deliberate. The time for reaction was over. It was time to prepare. He brought Kilo inside and locked the back door, securing a new heavy-duty brace at its base, a purely physical barrier that couldn't be hacked. He spent the next 3 hours turning his quiet suburban home into a fortified position. He was not just a homeowner, he was a SEAL operator preparing a defensive site. He checked the Overwatch team status on his encrypted device. They were in position, eyes on, but Jack knew they were a net, and Ivan was a fish small and smart enough to swim right through it. He installed new, independent battery-powered motion sensors at key ingress points, small, dark discs that would not be affected by a power cut. He cleaned and rechecked his personal firearm, then retrieved a second, heavier piece from a small fireproof safe. He felt the familiar cold weight of the metal in his hands, a comfort he was almost ashamed to admit. He knew Ivan. He knew how his mind worked. Ivan was a classic strategist. He wouldn't just breach a wall, he would dismantle the foundation first. He would attack Jack's mind, his sense of security. The boot print was the first psychological volley. Jack knew his own greatest asset was the one Ivan couldn't fully comprehend. He walked to the back door and opened it. Kilo, yard. The dog trotted out, his ears high, his posture alert. The afternoon was warm, the sun filtering through the tall oaks. To any observer, it was just a man playing with his dog. Jack let Kilo roam for a minute. Then he clapped his hands once, a sharp, echoing sound. Kilo froze, his head snapping back to Jack. Watch, Jack commanded. Not a signal, just the word. Kilo's body tensed. He lowered his head slightly and stared at the fence line where Jack had found the print, his body an unmoving portrait of focused intensity. He would not move, would not eat, would not drink, until Jack released him. Jack let him hold it for a full minute, testing his discipline. Good. Heel. Kilo broke the pose and returned to his side. Now, the real work. Secure. This was a hand signal, a flat palm moving in a slicing motion. Kilo immediately began a patrol pattern. He didn't just run the fence. He moved to the first corner of the yard, went low, sniffing the air, then moved to the base of the deck, checking the dark space beneath it. He swept the entire yard in a grid, just as he had been taught, a four-legged soldier clearing a room. He finished, sat, and looked at Jack. All clear. Good boy. Jack then held up a single closed fist. Wraith. The change was instantaneous and profound. Kilo seemed to shrink. He flattened himself to the ground, his ears pressed back, his breathing becoming inaudible. He moved from the sunny patch of grass into the shade of the house, a black-on-black silhouette. He was no longer a dog. He was a shadow. This was the command for absolute stealth. No sound, no growl, no bark, no matter the provocation. It was the hardest thing to teach, a command that went against every canine instinct. It was the command Jack prayed he would never have to use. He watched the dog hold the wraith position for 2 minutes, a silent, living weapon, and felt a sliver of control return. He had an element of surprise Ivan couldn't have planned for. Break, Jack said softly. The dog instantly relaxed, becoming a normal German shepherd again, his tongue lolling in the heat. Jack went down on one knee and pulled the dog into a rough, affectionate embrace, burying his face in Kilo's thick fur. His phone rang, the shrill, normal sound cutting through the quiet. He tensed, but the caller ID was Mrs. Peterson. He let out a breath and answered. Mrs. Peterson, you okay? Oh, Jack, her voice was thin, reedy, not her usual confident tone. She was clearly frightened. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you're a busy man. You're not bothering me, Mrs. Peterson. What's wrong? He stood up, pacing slowly, Kilo watching him. It's just, you'll think I'm a silly old woman, but I saw a car last night, after dark, down at the end of the cul-de-sac. It just sat there, Jack, for over an hour. The lights were off. Jack went cold. The Overwatch team was in a different location, a surveillance van. This was something else. What kind of car? That's just it. It was so normal. A dark sedan. Like a rental. But my Mitten, she dropped to a whisper as if afraid of being overheard. My little cat, Mitten. He just sat on the windowsill hissing. He never does that. He just stared at that car and hissed for an hour straight. And he won't come out from under my bed today. Jack stopped pacing. An animal's intuition. Mrs. Peterson's cat and his dog. They were sensing the same predator. Mrs. Peterson, that's not silly at all, he said, his voice calm and reassuring, the way he would speak to a spooked asset. You were right to call. It's probably just kids, but you can't be too careful. Did you call the police? Oh, goodness, no. I didn't want to be a bother. You call them. You call 911 anytime you feel unsafe. That's what they're for. And listen, I'm upgrading my own security system today. I'll be sure to aim one of my new cameras toward the street. I'll keep an eye out for you. Oh, Jack, would you? You're such a good man, just like my David. She sounded relieved, her voice returning to normal. You're safe, Mrs. Peterson. I'll look out for you. He hung up, but the reassurance he gave her was a lie. He wasn't a good man. He was a target. And by living next to him, Mrs. Peterson was now in the blast radius. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat in his dark living room in a hardback chair facing the front door. Kilo was not on his dog bed. He was at his master's feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, reflecting the pale moonlight. Jack was cleaning his firearm for the third time, a pointless, meditative ritual. He thought about Manny. He thought about the mistake, the bad intel, the 1/10 of a second he had frozen. He had failed his brother. Now Volkov was here to remind him. He looked down at Kilo. The dog was watching him, not with the adoration of a pet, but with the steady, quiet comradeship of a fellow soldier in a foxhole. "He's here because of me, boy," Jack whispered, his voice thick, the first crack in his iron control. "He's here to take me, and he'll go through you to do it." Kilo lifted his head. He pushed his nose under Jack's hand, forcing the man to stop his work. "I can't lose anyone else," Jack breathed, the confession torn from him. "I can't fail again. And I can't lose you." Kilo whined, a deep, empathetic sound. He stood up, placed his head on Jack's knee, and simply looked at him, a promise of unwavering, uncomplicated loyalty. This was his true partner, the one who had seen him at his worst, the one who had pulled him from the nightmares, the one who would be with him at the end. It was in that quiet, vulnerable moment that it happened. Click. Thump. The digital clock on the cable box went dark. The green light of the Wi-Fi router died. The low hum of the refrigerator ceased. The entire house was plunged into absolute, profound darkness and silence. Jack and Kilo didn't move. They didn't even breathe. They were two statues in the dark. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Thump. Click. The refrigerator hummed back to life. The cable box clock flashed 12:00. The Wi-Fi router began its blinking reboot sequence. It was a simple power cut. A glitch. But it wasn't. Jack knew it wasn't. It was not a neighborhood outage. It was his house. Only his house. It was a precise, targeted, 2-second shutdown. Ivan had found his power box. He had bypassed the Overwatch team. He had bypassed the civilian security system. He had walked right up to Jack's house and cut the power, just to prove that he could. It was not an attack. It was a signature. A message far louder than the boot print: "I am here. I am in your walls. I can turn your world off anytime I want." In the darkness, Jack and Kilo remained perfectly still, listening. The only sound in the house was the faint green blinking of the new battery-powered motion sensor Jack had installed just hours before. The sky had turned a sickly shade of bruised purple by 1,600 hours. The air, which had been cool and still, was now charged with a nervous, electric energy. The local news had been issuing frantic warnings for the last 6 hours. A severe Pacific storm was barreling up the coast, promising torrential rain and gale-force winds. To the residents of Coronado, it was a dangerous inconvenience. To Jack, it was a tactical nightmare. To Ivan Volkov, it was a gift. Jack stood at his living room window, which was now crisscrossed with heavy-duty tape to prevent shattering. Kilo was at his feet, his body a low, vibrating engine of anxiety. The dog could feel the pressure drop, and he could feel his master's tension. The two were feeding off each other, a closed loop of escalating dread. "I don't like this," Jack said, his voice low, speaking into his encrypted phone. He was talking to Wallace. "This weather is a blank check for any kind of movement." "I agree," Wallace's gravelly voice came back, insulated from the static. "The Overwatch team is blind. Wind is too high for the drone, and visibility is near zero. I'm pulling you out, Stone. The safe house is prepped. Be there by 1800. Jack hated it. Hated running. It felt like a retreat, a concession to Volkov. "Understood," he said, the word clipped. He had wanted to be the bait, to set the trap. Instead, the storm was setting it for him. "And Jack," Wallace said, a rare note of humanity in his voice. "He's just a man. Don't let him become a ghost in your head." Jack hung up without replying. He looked down at Kilo. "Change of plans, boy. We're moving." The dog looked up, whining as if understanding. As the first fat drops of rain began to hammer the windows, Jack began his exit protocol. He packed a minimal bag. He armed the new perimeter sensors. He took the heavy-duty K9 transport crate, a reinforced steel and polymer box designed for air travel, and placed it by the back door. Kilo hated the crate. He tolerated it, but he hated it. "Just for the ride, boy," Jack said, his voice gentle. "We'll be out of it soon." Kilo looked at him with an expression of profound betrayal, but with a quiet command, walked into the steel box. Jack gave him his favorite worn-out chew toy, a piece of old rope. "Good boy. Watch." He secured the heavy-duty latch, a solid, definitive clunk. It was 17:30. He was preparing to carry the crate to his truck when the lights flickered and died. This time, they did not come back on. The house was plunged into a dark, roaring silence, broken only by the shriek of the wind and the percussive drumming of the rain. A perfect, storm-induced blackout. Jack's head snapped up. "Too convenient," he whispered. At the exact same moment, 300 yards away, Ivan Volkov lowered his binoculars. He was drenched, his tactical gear shedding water. He sat in the darkness of the woods that bordered Jack's property line. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash in his gaunt face. He had not cut the power. The storm had done his work for him. "God is on our side," he murmured to the two men at his side. They were not his sons. They were his tools. The first man, Kurt, was a broad-shouldered German, a former KSK operative, a specialist in explosives and brutal close-quarters combat. The second, Misha, was a wiry Serb, a wraith who had learned his trade in the alleys of Belgrade, a specialist with a blade. "Kurt, the front door." Loud. "Misha, the back." "Quiet," Ivan ordered. "He will be expecting a primary breach. I will be the tertiary. Go." The two men melted into the rain, a pair of deadly phantoms. Ivan waited. He knew Corrigan was a SEAL. He knew he was dangerous. He was counting on it. He wanted his men to soften the target, to drain his energy, to make him bleed. He wanted Corrigan to be desperate, to be tired, when he finally came for him. Inside the house, Jack was a ghost of a different kind. He moved without a sound. He had his primary weapon, his sidearm holstered, and a combat knife strapped to his vest. He didn't need the lights. He had trained in darkness. He heard it, the faint beep of his battery-powered sensor by the back door. "Misha." Simultaneously, the front door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a small, precise explosive charge. "Kurt." A classic hard breach. "Kilo." "Quiet," Jack hissed. The dog was already going ballistic inside the crate, the sound of his 90-pound body hitting the steel walls muffled by the storm. Jack moved to the hallway, the choke point. Kurt, a massive silhouette against the raging storm outside, was in. He was moving fast, sweeping the living room. Jack pressed against the wall, let him pass. As Kurt turned to clear the hallway, Jack struck. It was not a fight. It was an execution. It was brutal, professional, and silent. Jack moved like a surgeon, disabling Kurt's weapon arm, a blur of motion ending with a move that broke his neck. The big man crumpled to the floor without a sound. One down. Jack didn't even pause. He spun, already moving toward the kitchen. The sensor had been tripped. "Misha." He entered the kitchen, a dark room of shadows. The back door was wide open, rain lashing the linoleum. Jack moved low, using the island as cover. He saw the flicker of movement by the pantry. The Serb was good. He was silent. Clink. A knife on the floor. Misha had thrown it as a diversion. Jack didn't fall for it, but it made him hesitate. In that hesitation, Misha attacked. He came from the top, having climbed onto the counters. He dropped onto Jack's back like a panther, his own blade flashing, aiming for the kidney. Jack roared, the first sound he'd made. He slammed himself backward into the refrigerator, trying to crush the man. The impact was brutal. Misha held on, the knife slicing deep into the meat of Jack's left arm. Jack spun, grabbing the Serb's wrist, and the two men fell to the floor in a desperate, tangled battle for control of the blade. Jack felt the hot, wet gush of his own blood. He was losing leverage. Crash. The sound from the living room made both men flinch. It was the sound of the K9 crate being overturned, followed by a metallic, furious howl of rage and fear. That was all the distraction Jack needed. He used Misha's momentary glance to break his grip, reverse the hold, and drive the Serb's own blade into his side. Misha went rigid, his eyes wide with surprise, a soft gasp escaping his lips. He was gone. Two down. Jack staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm. The house was a wreck. Two bodies, rain and wind pouring in through two open doors, and the frantic, terrified sound of his dog. "It's okay, boy. I'm coming," he yelled, moving toward the crate. He rounded the corner into the living room, and there, standing perfectly still, silhouetted against the shattered front door, was Ivan Volkov. He was not looking at Jack. He was looking at the overturned K9 crate where Kilo was screaming, a sound of pure, animalistic fury. "So," Ivan said, his voice calm, projecting easily over the storm. "That is the weakness." Jack raised his weapon, but he was too slow. He was bleeding. He was tired. Ivan had timed it perfectly. Ivan was not holding a gun. He was holding a small black cylinder. He tossed it. It rolled across the floor and stopped at Jack's feet. A military-grade M84 stun grenade. A flashbang. Jack didn't even have time to turn his head. The world exploded in a single, blinding, deafening white flash. Jack collapsed, his senses obliterated. His ears screamed with a single high-pitched tone. His vision was gone, replaced by a swimming, purple-black static. He was on his knees, disoriented, nauseated, and completely vulnerable. He could smell the ozone from the blast. He could feel the rain on his face. And he could hear, dimly, two sounds: the frantic, desperate scratching of his dog trapped in a steel box, and the slow, deliberate footsteps of Ivan Volkov walking toward him in the dark. The world was gone. There was no light, only a swimming, agonizing sea of white-hot static behind Jack's eyelids. There was no sound, only a single, piercing high-frequency tone that felt as if it were being drilled directly into his brain. The M84 flashbang had done its job. Jack was deaf, blind, and off balance. A warrior reduced to a helpless heap on his own floor. He tried to get his hands under him to push up, but his left arm, sliced open by Misha's blade, buckled instantly, sending a fresh, nauseating spike of pain through his body. He was on his knees. He could feel the cold rainwater blowing in through the shattered front door. He could smell the acrid, metallic tang of the grenade's residue. And through the all-consuming ringing in his ears, two other sounds began to bleed through. The first was a frantic, desperate, tearing sound. It was the sound of Kilo, trapped in the steel K9 crate, throwing his 90-pound body against the metal. A desperate, scraping, screaming sound of pure, undirected panic. The second sound was a slow, measured footstep. Calm, unhurried. Ivan Volkov walked through the debris of Jack's living room as if he were strolling through a park. He stopped in front of the kneeling, disoriented seal. Jack sensed the presence, a large shape blotting out the non-existent light. He lashed out, a blind, desperate punch with his good right arm. Ivan caught his wrist in a grip of iron. "No," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it cut through the ringing in Jack's ears. "The fight is over." Ivan twisted Jack's arm, forcing him onto his stomach. The pain from his wound and the pressure on his wrist were absolute. He was a professional, but he was also human, bleeding, disoriented, and outmatched. He felt Ivan's knee press into his back. He felt his good arm being yanked behind him. A plastic zip cuff was cinched tight, biting deep into his flesh. Then his other arm was pulled back, the cuff ratcheting painfully over the gash. He was neutralized. Ivan rolled him over. Jack lay on his back, the storm raging above him, his vision slowly, painfully returning. It was like looking through a fractured, watery lens. He saw a tall, dark silhouette looming over him. "You took my son," Ivan's voice came again, clear this time. He knelt beside Jack, his face coming into blurry focus. His eyes were cold, gray, and held no madness, only a profound, empty purpose. Dmitri. He was 19. He liked football. He was studying to be an engineer. Ivan reached out and, with a gloved hand, tapped Jack's cheek. You are a butcher. A coward who calls in strikes from the sky. You never even saw his face." "It was war," Jack choked out, the words tasting like ash. His hearing was returning, and with it, the full, terrible sound from the crate. Kilo was not just rampaging, he was screaming, a high, terrified animal sound that was tearing Jack's soul apart. "War." Ivan laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "War is for soldiers. This is pest control. And you, Chief Petty Officer Corrigan, are the pest." Ivan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me, did you freeze when you heard the call? The one that said you hit a civilian vehicle? Did you feel that little cold stone in your stomach? You did, didn't you? Just like you froze for your friend. Ice colder than the rain, colder than the boot print. What?" "Manny," Ivan whispered. "Operation Nightfall. Your moment of failure. I have read the reports. I know everything. I know you froze. And he died." Jack's mind, already reeling, shattered. Ivan had not come for information. He had not come for state secrets. He had come to dismantle Jack's very identity, to hold up a mirror to his deepest, most secret failure. Jack's fight was gone, replaced by a suffocating, black void of shame. The sound from the crate was worse now. It was wet. A rhythmic thud, 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 then a scrape. Kilo was injuring himself. He was bleeding. He was breaking his teeth on the steel, trying to get to his master. He is loyal, Ivan observed, looking at the crate. It is a pity. Ivan stood up. He walked to the shattered remains of the sliding glass door in the back. He looked out into the howling storm toward Mrs. Peterson's dark, quiet house. Your neighbor, Ivan mused, loud enough for Jack to hear. The old woman, Peterson. The widow. She seems very alone. He turned his head, looking back at Jack. She likes your dog. She must like you, too. Such a quiet street. Such a fragile piece. No, Jack whispered. The one word was all he had left. Leave her. Leave her? Ivan walked back to Jack, his boot pressing lightly on the zip-tied hands, causing a jolt of agony. Like you left Manny? Like you left my Dmitri? There is no one to leave, Chief. There is only a debt to be paid. You have taken my son. I will take everything that makes you a man. Your strength. Your pride. He looked at the crate. The thudding had quieted, replaced by a desperate, wet panting and a low, terrible whimpering. Your hope, Ivan said. He pulled a 9mm pistol from his thigh holster. The weapon was already fitted with a heavy black suppressor. He held it with the steady hand of a surgeon. This is the problem with attachments, Chief. They are a liability. A weakness. He began to walk toward the crate, his steps slow and deliberate. No, Jack pleaded, trying to get to his feet, but he was bound. He was helpless. He was on the floor, watching as the man who had stolen his soul walked toward the steel box that held his heart. Victor's gaze was locked on the crate. He could hear the dog inside, a low, pained growl. The animal was hurt but still defiant. A point of leverage, Victor said to himself, remembering his own words. A tool to be broken. He raised the suppressed pistol. He placed the end of it directly against the metal latch of the K9 crate. He was not going to shoot the dog through the crate. He was going to open it. No, worse, he was going to make Mark watch. He rapped the suppressor hard on the steel. Quiet, beast. He turned to Mark, a cold, curious look on his face. It's time to make a choice. He gestured with the gun. Your Honor, or the dog. He was not going to kill it. Not yet. He was going to use it. He changed his aim, moving the gun away from the latch and pointing it directly at the center of the crate's air holes. I will ask you once, Victor said, his voice flat. The location of your team's safe house. The one you were running to. Give it to me, and the beast lives. Mark's world, which had been reduced to a pinpoint of agony, suddenly crystallized. It wasn't just about his failure. It was about his duty. No, Mark spat, the word full of blood and rain. Go to hell. Victor smiled. It was a terrible, broken-hearted smile. I thought so. You SEALs are so predictable. He turned his full attention back to the crate. So be it. Say goodbye to your partner. He clicked the safety off. The small sound was the loudest thing Mark had ever heard. The click of the pistol safety echoed in the ruined living room, louder than the storm, louder than the ringing in Jack's ears. Jack was on his knees, bound and bleeding. He had refused Ivan's demand. He had chosen his honor, and in doing so, had condemned his partner. He watched, his vision still blurry, as Ivan Volkov, the man who had torn his life apart, kept the suppressed pistol aimed at the K9 crate. Kilo was inside, whimpering now, a low, pained sound of betrayal and confusion. Ivan waited. He seemed to be savoring the moment, this absolute, final victory over the SEAL spirit. No, Jack whispered, a final, useless plea. Don't. Please. Ivan looked from the crate back to Jack. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not mercy, but a cold, intellectual curiosity. He lowered the gun by a single inch. No, he repeated, as if considering. You plead. Good. That is a start. He stepped away from the crate and walked back to Jack, his boots crunching on the glass from the shattered door. He loomed over the kneeling SEAL. You are broken, he stated, but you are not yet complete. You are still defiant. Ivan's eyes drifted back to the crate. The dog was silent now, listening. Ivan's thin lips twisted into a smirk. He had a new idea, a better one. Shooting the dog through the steel was too quick, too merciful. It was an execution. He wanted a sacrifice. You want him to live? Ivan asked, his voice deceptively soft. Jack's heart hammered. Hope was a poison, but he drank it. Yes. Then you will watch him fail you. Ivan turned and walked back to the crate. He holstered his pistol, a sign of ultimate contempt. He no longer saw Jack or the dog as a threat. He was a master, and these were his broken playthings. He is a beast, Ivan said, his glove resting on the crate's latch. A dumb animal. It is just like you, Corrigan, to put your faith in something so simple. You think this bond is real? This loyalty? It is just training. It is fear. It is a leash. Jack's mind was racing. He was watching Ivan's hand. He wasn't watching the man, he was watching the latch. No, Jack said, his voice low. He was not pleading. He was focusing. He's a partner. We will see, Ivan chuckled. He unclipped a combat knife from his vest. Not to use it, but to use the hilt. He banged it hard on the metal. Come, beast. Time to die. And with a single, arrogant twist of his wrist, Ivan Volkov undid the heavy-duty latch. He pulled the reinforced steel door open. In that half-second, that fractional, infinite, decimal moment, Jack's world went from a slow, agonizing crawl to the speed of light. Ivan was blinded by his own arrogance, standing directly in front of the opening. Jack was on his knees 20 feet away. He had one weapon left, his voice. Wraith. He roared. The word was not a plea. It was not a scream. It was a command. It was the single most absolute order he had ever given, forged in desperation and a lifetime of training. The door of the crate flew open. A 90-pound black and tan missile, frantic with terror and rage, exploded from the steel box. But it was not a missile. It was a ghost. Ivan, in his surprise, had no time to react. He saw a blur of motion, a flash of teeth. He braced for the impact, for the dog to leap at his throat or his chest, but the dog did neither. Kilo, in mid-air, heard his master's command. Wraith. The command that meant stealth, the command that meant disappear. It overrode his panic. It overrode his rage. It overrode his instinct to attack the man in front of him. He twisted, his paws hitting the soaked floor. He did not touch Ivan. He did not bark. He did not growl. He used his explosive forward momentum to veer, diving low and to the left. He shot past Ivan, a low, dark shape, and vanished into the darkness of the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The silence that followed was absolute. Ivan stood, his hands still on the open crate door, in a state of profound confusion. He spun around, searching the shadows. What? Where? He looked at Jack, his eyes wide with a flicker of true, animal fear. The situation was no longer in his control. His leverage was gone, and a K9, a wraith, was now loose in the dark house behind him. Stupid animal. Ivan roared. He unholstered his pistol, sweeping it toward the dark hallway. It was the 1 second Jack needed. It was the 1 second of distraction. Ivan's eyes were not on him. His weapon was not on him. His mind was not on him. Jack, still bound at the hands, exploded from his knees. He was not a man. He was a projectile. He threw his entire body forward, a low, SEAL-style tackle, aiming his head like a battering ram at Ivan's midsection. He was too slow. Ivan, a trained operative, heard the movement and started to turn, but he wasn't the only one attacking. From the hallway darkness, a second ghost emerged. Kilo had not fled. He had obeyed. He had gone silent, circled around through the dining room, and identified the true threat. Just as Ivan turned to face Jack, Kilo struck from behind. He did not bite his arm. He did not bite his throat. He lunged, his jaws snapping shut on the one target that would neutralize any man, no matter how strong, the Achilles tendon. Ivan screamed. It was a high, thin, terrible sound as Kilo's teeth sank deep into his left leg. His leg buckled instantly. He was off balance. Jack, in the same instant, collided with him. The headbutt missed, but Jack's shoulder slammed into Ivan's chest. It was a three-way collision. Ivan screaming, his leg useless. Jack, bound and bleeding, driving forward with pure adrenaline. Kilo, a 90-pound weight of fury, attached to his enemy's leg. All three, man, and dog, crashed to the soaked floor in a chaotic, tangled, and desperate heap. The suppressed pistol flew from Ivan's hand, skittering across the dark, wet floor. The fight was not over. It had just begun. There was no floor. There was only a cold, wet, churning chaos of water, glass, and limbs. The three-way collision, Jack, Ivan, and Kilo, was a desperate, tangled knot of violence. Jack was at the bottom, his cuffed hands trapped beneath him, the gash in his left arm screaming as Ivan's weight crushed down on it. Ivan roared, a sound of pure agony, his left leg a ruin from Kilo's bite. Kilo himself was a force of nature, a growling, 90-pound anchor of fury, his teeth still locked onto Ivan's ankle. The suppressed pistol, the object that meant life or death, lay a yard away, a dark shape in a puddle of rainwater. It was a race. Ivan, a trained killer, reacted first. With a pain-fueled scream, he used his one good leg to kick backward, slamming his heel into Kilo's ribs. The dog yelped, a high-pitched sound of pain, but his jaws did not release. The loyalty was absolute. Ivan was trapped, but Jack was trapped, too. He was bound. He used his legs, his only free weapons, trying to kick and buck to dislodge the larger man. "Get off!" he grunted, twisting. Ivan, ignoring the dog on his leg, saw Jack. He knew he couldn't stand. He knew his leg was gone. He released his focus on Kilo and turned his attention to the bound, bleeding seal beneath him. He was still on top. He could still win. He began to rain punches down on Jack's face, a desperate, brutal, hammering assault. "You die here." Jack took the first 2 blows, his head bouncing off the hard, sodden floor. His vision, already blurry, exploded into white stars. He was losing. He was tied. And he was being beaten to death. Kilo saw it. He saw his master, his partner, the only god he knew, being destroyed. He made a tactical decision. He let go of Ivan's ankle. Ivan, feeling the pressure release, let out a grunt of triumph, a fatal mistake. He thought the dog was retreating, but Kilo was just re-engaging. As Ivan raised his fist for another blow, he saw the pistol. It was only a foot from his hand. He lunged for it. He was too late. Kilo, with a speed that defied the laws of nature, launched himself from the floor. He did not go for the leg. He did not go for the throat. He saw the threat. He saw the hand reaching for the weapon. Kilo's jaws clamped down on Ivan's right forearm. It was not a bite. It was a demolition. Jack, beneath the struggle, heard it, a wet, sickening crunch of bone and sinew. Ivan screamed. It was not a roar of anger. It was a high, thin, inhuman shriek of pure anatomical agony. The pistol, which Ivan's fingers had just grazed, was kicked away by the dog's lunge. Ivan, his right arm now a useless, mangled ruin, his left leg shattered, was a broken man. But he was not a defeated one. He rolled off Jack, his body convulsing in shock, Kilo still attached to his ruined arm, shaking his head, grinding the bones together. Ivan screamed again and again, his left, non-dominant hand fumbling at his boot. "Kilo, off!" Jack yelled, his voice raw. The dog, in a perfect, instant display of obedience even in the heat of battle, released his hold. Ivan, his face pale and slick with sweat and rain, scrambled backward, his broken arm cradled to his chest, his shattered leg dragging behind him. He looked like a wounded animal. Jack, his hands still cuffed, began to crawl. He was shrimping across the floor, his body agonizingly slow, moving toward the prize. The pistol. It was a race of 2 broken men. "You beast," Ivan spat, his eyes wide, no longer with arrogance but with the flat, dead terror of a man who knew he was beaten. He was bleeding. He was broken. Jack was almost there. His cuffed hands, slippery with blood and water, were only inches from the gun's grip. Ivan's left hand, the only one he had left, came out of his boot. It was not a gun. It was a thin, black-handled combat knife. He saw Jack, a helpless, bound man, stretching for the weapon. He knew he couldn't win the race, so he changed the target. With a final, desperate surge of hatred, Ivan lunged. He did not lunge for the gun. He lunged for Jack. He launched his entire body, broken leg and all, onto Jack's back, a blade in his one good hand. He would end this. He would kill the seal, even if it cost him his own life. Jack felt the weight land on him. He felt the cold point of the knife against his neck. He was done. A black and tan streak. A blur of loyalty. Kilo, who had been waiting for the next command, saw the knife. He saw the lethal, final threat. He did not hesitate. He did not wait for an order. He threw himself between the knife and his master. There was no sound of a struggle. There was just a soft, sickening thump as the 6-inch blade, driven by all of Ivan's remaining strength, buried itself to the hilt in Kilo's shoulder. The dog let out a sound that Jack would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. It was a deep, guttural, agonizing roar of pain. But he did not pull away. His duty was not done. Ivan, his eyes wide with shock at what he had done, tried to pull the knife out for a second strike, but he couldn't. Kilo, with the blade still buried in his body, clamped his jaws down on Ivan's last remaining limb, his left arm, the one holding the knife. Kilo held on, his body shaking in agony, the blade trapped in his own flesh, but his master safe. He had neutralized the final threat. He had done his job. That second, that single heroic, sacrificial second, was all Jack needed. Ivan was trapped, his arm impaled on the dog. Jack, free of the man's weight, slid the last few inches. His cuffed hands closed around the cold, wet grip of the pistol. He rolled, the movement awkward, his left arm a blaze of fire. He brought the gun up, his two cuffed hands making a stable, if desperate, platform. He pointed it at the man who was still tangled with his dying dog. "Get off him," Jack roared, his voice a broken thing. Ivan froze. He looked from the pistol to the man to the dog who was bleeding out on his arm. The fight was over. The hatred in his eyes was replaced by a sudden, empty void. He had lost. And in that moment of absolute, ringing silence, a new sound cut through the storm. Whoop. 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 Distant sirens, getting closer. Flashing red and blue lights began to strobe through the rain, painting the horrific tableau in flashes of garish, pulsating color. Mrs. Peterson had heard the crunch of the breech or the single wild shot from Ivan's gun. She had called 911. The world was coming. Jack kept the pistol trained on Ivan's face. "Don't move." He then looked down at Kilo. The dog was still holding on, but his grip was weakening. His fur was dark, soaked in his own blood. But his eyes were open, and they were looking not at Ivan, but at Jack. "I did it, master. You are safe." Tears streamed down Jack's face, mixing with the rain and the blood. "Hold on, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Hold on. They're coming." The world was reduced to three sounds: the screaming wind, the approaching sirens, and the shallow, wet breaths of the dog bleeding out over his enemy. Jack's cuffed hands held the pistol steady, the muzzle aimed directly at Ivan Volkov's face. Ivan was a broken puppet, his body a ruin, his last remaining limb, his left arm, still trapped in the dying dog's jaws. He was beaten, but he was alive. And he was watching Jack. "Don't move," Jack breathed, his voice raw. But his eyes were not on Ivan. They were on Kilo, on the rise and fall of his ribs. It was too slow. The blood pooling beneath them was too much, too dark. "Hold on, boy. Just hold on." Headlights swept the room, turning the rain-streaked, bloody chaos into a terrifying, strobe-lit tableau. The sirens died, replaced by slamming car doors and shouted commands. "Coronado PD. Show me your hands. Drop the weapon." Two uniformed officers, their faces pale and young, burst in through the shattered front door, their service weapons held in a two-handed grip. They saw a nightmare. A cuffed man, Jack, pointing a gun at another man, Ivan, who was tangled with a large, bloody dog, while two other bodies, Kurt and Misha, lay in the shadows. "Drop it. Now." On the ground. The first officer, a young man with Riley on his tag, screamed, his voice cracking. Jack didn't move. He couldn't. If he dropped the gun, if he moved, Ivan might react. And if Ivan moved, Kilo would be lost. "He is the hostile," Jack yelled back, his voice ragged. "I am secure. Last chance, sir. Drop the..." "Stand down, officer." A new voice, one of absolute, iron authority, cut through the storm. Captain Wallace, flanked by the two-man Overwatch team in full tactical gear, stepped in behind the officers. Wallace's face was a granite mask of controlled fury. He looked at the scene, at his bleeding operator, at the dead hostiles, and at Ivan. "Officer Riley," Wallace said, his voice dropping, "holster your weapon. This is a federal crime scene. My men will take it from here." Riley, overwhelmed, looked at Wallace's gear, at his face, and slowly, thankfully, lowered his pistol. The room flooded with light as the team, now joined by EMTs, fanned out. One medic immediately went to Jack. "Sir, you're cuffed and you're bleeding." "The cuffs first," Jack grunted, his eyes never leaving Kilo. One of his teammates used a key, and the plastic bit into Jack's wrists as it was cut. His hands were free, but he didn't move. Ivan Volkov, his eyes dull with shock and defeat, was pulled from the tangle. As they rolled him onto a gurney, Kilo's jaws finally went slack, his head falling to the floor. Ivan was cuffed to the stretcher. He said nothing. He looked at no one. He was a ghost, a father who had failed in his vengeance. And he was gone, wheeled out into the storm. "Sir, let me see that arm," the medic said, reaching for Jack. "No," Jack said, shoving the man's hand away. He fell to his knees beside Kilo. The knife was still in. The blood was everywhere. "Him. You work on him. He's a dog, son," the medic said, his voice tired. I have human victims. He is not a dog. Jack roared, his voice breaking with a desperate, animalistic pain. He saved my life. Help him. Jack. A small voice cut through the professional chaos. Mrs. Peterson was standing in the shattered doorway, wrapped in a trench coat, her gray hair plastered to her head by the rain. She was trembling, but her eyes were fixed on Jack. The police had put up tape, but she had walked right through it. Ma'am, Officer Riley started, you cannot be in. Be quiet, Mrs. Peterson snapped, her voice possessing a sudden, steely authority that silenced the young cop. She was holding a plastic box, a first aid kit. Her eyes met Jack's. She saw the tears on his face. She saw the dying dog. My husband, she said, her voice trembling but firm, always said, you stop the bleeding first. She marched past the officer, past the SEALs, and knelt in the puddle of water and blood beside Jack. What do we do, son? Jack looked at her. This small, brave, terrified woman. She was his anchor. Pressure, he choked out. The knife, it's the only thing keeping him from bleeding out. We have two, around it. Press here. He guided her hand. Mrs. Peterson, her own hands shaking, took a clean towel from the kit she'd brought and pressed it hard against the gushing wound in Kilo's shoulder, her face pale. Harder, Jack said, his own hands, now free, joining hers. Together, a Navy SEAL and a 68-year-old widow held the line. They worked in silence, a two-person team, holding back the dark, their hands overlapping on the wounded animal. A new figure appeared, a military K-9 handler Jack had seen at the base. Sir, they called for me. He's alive, Jack said. Get the transport. Get him to Eris. Now. 3 days later, the storm was a memory. The sun was shining on the sterile, clean walls of the military veterinary hospital. Jack sat on a cold steel stool. His left arm was in a black sling, 32 stitches holding the muscle together. His hands were clean. He hadn't slept. The door opened. Dr. Eris, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes and gray-streaked hair, walked in, holding a metal chart. He's awake, she said without preamble. Jack stood, his knees weak. He followed her into a recovery room. Kilo was there. He was lying on a cot, his side shaved, a constellation of tubes and wires running into his body. The fur around his shoulder was gone, replaced by a massive stitched incision. But he was breathing. The blade missed his brachial artery by 2 millimeters, Dr. Eris said, her voice quiet. It was a terrible wound. He lost nearly 30% of his blood volume. He should not be here, Chief. Jack walked slowly to the cot. He reached out a trembling hand. But his will, the doctor continued, a small, weary smile touching her lips. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen dogs give up. I've seen them let go. This one? He refused. He's the most stubborn, iron-willed patient I have ever had. He's a fighter. Just like his owner. Jack's hand touched Kilo's head. The dog's eyes, dull with medication, flickered open. He saw Jack, and then a small, weak thump, thump, thump of his tail on the cot. Jack's composure, the iron discipline of a Navy SEAL, broke. He dropped his head onto the dog's chest, his shoulders shaking, and let the hot, silent tears of a survivor finally fall. Good boy, he whispered, his voice thick. Good boy. I'm here. 1 week later, the sun was warm, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. The storm was over. Jack's house was a ruin of boarded-up windows and plywood doors. He wasn't there, he was next door. He sat on Mrs. Peterson's front porch, his arm still in the sling, a cup of hot tea steaming in his good hand. At his feet, lying in a patch of afternoon sun, was Kilo. The dog was wearing an undignified plastic cone, and a large white bandage covered his shoulder, but he was breathing deeply, his sleep peaceful. Mrs. Peterson came out and sat in the rocking chair beside Jack. They sat in a comfortable, quiet companionship.